All right, we're live. We're good to go. Hello, everybody. My name is Ahmed Dents, Development Coordinator here at San Diego Repertory Theater, and I would like to welcome you to the second installment of We Are Listening. My guest tonight is the wonderful, outstanding Monique Gaffney. We're going to have a great conversation tonight. Couple of things before we get started, a couple of housekeeping issues. Make sure, please, as you are entering the room, make sure that you have your video off. And make sure you are muted, please. Make sure you're only seeing myself and Monique on your screen. For those of you who, we're broadcasting this live on Zoom, but also on San Diego Rep's Facebook page. If you did register on the Facebook page, you will receive notifications when we get into our continuing installments. Our next talk will be on July 16th. With Mr. Freedom Bradley Ballantyne. If y'all don't know him, I'm sure a lot of you do. He'll be my next guest on July 16th, so we'll keep you up to date on what's going on. When me and Monique are done talking, there will be a question and answer session. Please submit all your questions in the text via Zoom or via Facebook. Again, you can also tune in right now on Facebook, and this will be available for you also later on YouTube. And I think if I forgot anything, Sharisa will let me know. But I think that's all the announcements I needed to get to right now. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. Again, my guest today, I have been knowing this woman ever since I have been working in theater. And she is an amazing actress. She is an outstanding person, all around hilarious too. And so my guest tonight is Miss Monique Gaffney. How you doing, Monique?
I am doing absolutely wonderful. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh yeah, thank you for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. And before we get into talk, to answer a particular question from your friend.
Absolutely.
She wanted to know exactly how We Are Listening came about, and so it's no surprise that we're in the middle of this pandemic, and then of course after the death of George Floyd, which was kind of just the catalyst and the match to set fire to what was already a lot of racial tensions in this country and around the world. And just how horrific that death was, it really brought to light a lot of racial issues that were, if they were not on the surface, were right below the surface, and people realized that there were some things that needed to change with subsequent events. And so this is actually the brainchild of our artistic director, Sam Woodhouse, here at San Diego Repertory Theater, and Larry Aldridge, our managing director. And when I was approached to do this, I just told everybody that, like, number one, it had to be real. It had to be a real reason to do this. Did you really want to listen to what it was for Black actors, administrators, performing arts professionals to give their stories about what it's like to work in theater with this melanated shade? And number two, every guest that we brought on, we really wanted to have them to be able to have the agency for this to be a space for them to be 100% authentic and real, and to be able to really speak their mind. And so, all those things were met. And so here we find ourselves here on round two. And so that's how we came about, and that's where we're at. And here's where we'll be for a while. Let me go ahead and get into it. I want Monique to give herself a little introduction to you. And Monique, as you introduce yourself and tell the people what you're about, why don't you go ahead and give us a little background about how you started and how you got into theater?
Sure, absolutely. I first started in theater when I was a senior in high school at Poway High School, believe it or not, many years ago. You guys know I'm not going to share my age because a Black woman's not going to tell it. So I was a senior in high school, and we were doing a production of South Pacific. And although I am not a singer by any means necessary, I would say on that one, I was actually told by my biology professor, teacher at the time at the high school, he said, I think you should audition for this. I think you would be right. And I don't know why he said it, but I went ahead and I auditioned. I remember I sang Whitney Houston's, oh my Lord, the children, I believe the children are our futures, because it was just like, sang to my heart. And I guess it was good enough, we will say, to get into the show. And so I was actually up for one of the leads, and I don't recall the character's name by any means. And I didn't get the lead, but I got a sort of starring role as far as being the chorus and dancing and singing. And so after I did that production, I actually won what was called a Homer award at our school. I don't even know who Homer was in that respect, but I was like, there's only one Homer I know about, so okay. But at any rate, I won the award, and my biology teacher came up to me after that weekend of performances, and he said, oh, this is what you should do. And I was like, really? But I like science. And he's like, that's great. Use it all, but this is what you should do. And,
Right.
That's just a little bit. I grew up watching theater my whole life because of my father,
Right.
the late Dr. Floyd Gaffney, which I know we'll talk about for the entire hour. And so I grew up seeing, going to rehearsals, going to classes at University of California, San Diego, from when he started there in 71, so I saw, well, not 71, I was young, believe it or not, but I saw a lot of theater and just sort of led that life. But it really started for me as far as really being on stage when I was a senior in high school. Other than that, I was a dancer, which I still do to this day. I'm an avid Afro-Cuban dancer with Omoache, Afro-Cuban Cultural Arts. I've been a member since about 2000, I want to say 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. I love what I do, and I love sharing the gift. So
That's right.
It's an honor, and I do my best to respect that. So
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
As we stated, earlier, the purpose of this thing is to, these are the type of conversations we've always had amongst ourselves.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, regardless of whether everybody else knows it or not, these are the conversations we've had amongst ourselves because, like, you're out in the world, you can talk about your family with things that you can't necessarily talk to everybody else about. And so, while we're in this current climate where everybody says they want to listen to Black folks, and I'm just saying everybody says they do. We know there's different motivations for people, but we always have these conversations on what it is to be, Black, African American, Cuban American, Mexican American, Indian American, whatever it is, in this space that is predominantly white. It is predominantly white. Its administration is predominantly white. Its productions are predominantly white. Scripts are predominantly white. This is not news. This is just the world we live in. Absolutely. And for us, that brings a whole nother set of challenges. While we're in this time, give me a little bit of your experience of any types of challenges or observations that you've had in these years in working in the performing arts, especially here in San Diego, being a woman of color.
Sure. I have a good 25 years of experience, I'm embarrassed to admit. I was sort of going back, and I was leading up to this conversation, looking over my resume and thinking, okay, how many Black shows have I done that were all Black cast? How many shows have I done where I'm the one Black actor in a basically white story? Or how many shows have I done where it's just, you can play anything and it wasn't based on your race, right? So if I sort of linking up with the conversation that TJ, that part of the conversation that you got 2 weeks ago, like being the Blackter, it's like, okay, how many opportunities have I had to not be that, right? So I kind of divided it into those 3 categories. And to be honest, the experiences of doing Black theater and being the only one Black person in a white show were pretty even. As far as my experience being anything, like playing those roles that anybody could play, not dependent on their ethnicity, were far smaller. Right. And so I thought, okay, in terms of representation here in San Diego, I've had a great opportunity. I cannot complain in that respect. My father opened many, many doors for me, and I am forever, ingratiated for that. Right. Because he cracked it open, I could push it open further and say, okay, here I come with my foot. Now, who am I bringing along with me? Which is important, right? This is how you're going to build that community. That's how you're going to build future opportunities for people who come behind me. And I knew that was important, and that's where I come from. And I would say some of the challenges happen to be when you get pigeonholed into certain lanes, right? Mm-hmm. The business as a whole, San Diego, DC, Atlanta, New York, what have you, Chicago, right? Right. There are certain roles that it's like, oh, that's what you're going to play, right? So beyond just playing the maid, or just beyond playing the prostitute, right, and its many different veins, or just playing the angry Black woman, which seems to be
Right.
a category now. It's like, right? I'm like, I can do other things, you guys. I actually can. And to be honest, I've had that opportunity, right?
Right.
But let's be honest, that is a category in itself.
Right. Exactly.
My concern has been with the industry as a whole, and certainly not just unique to San Diego, being narrowed down to these certain lanes. I'm like, I just want to be able to play the love interest because I'm the love interest. Nothing having to do with my race, right? I'm just the love interest. Or if I'm playing the villain, it doesn't need to be because I'm Black, it just needs to be because I'm playing the villain. So those opportunities are few and far between in terms of having that opportunity. And when that happens, and all of a sudden you get pigeonholed, and then you're like, okay, wait a minute, right? And then for certain plays that are being chosen in various seasons across the board, it's like, oh, that's what she does well. And then that's where you get stuck, and you cannot level up in terms of your career.
Right.
So even if you just want to get, if you want to get to Broadway, or if you're interested in going into film and television, what have you, sometimes that pigeonholing of the actual opportunities that you're provided with can strangle you. And then you're like, what? This is not working for me. I need to do something. So then that means the system has to change, right?
Right.
The system that sees me as one particular thing. So I know that needs to change. You know, it's evident, it's obvious. And then they only allow a small pool of us to be at the top, right? It's like, oh, nope, I got my Denzel Washingtons and my Viola Davis, and it's like, that's it. And those are the tokens, and they will represent the whole.
Right.
And then we feel like we want to allow other people in there, we will allow them, right? And it's not calling them out there for anything they've done wrong. It's just like, that is what has happened in terms of the hierarchy. And you're just like, I don't want to be crabs in a barrel where I'm crawling over your face to get to the top, because that's not what it is. Everybody has a place, and there is a space for everybody. So I just feel like that's important to have, right? And so I want to see more opportunities for a variety of roles. That's like the big thing, and not be limited to just being Black. Like that's probably the biggest thing. And then in terms of really getting into positions of leadership, I want to see those doors open up more, which, you know, those are the discussions across the country. Can I get in the boardroom? Can I have these meaningful discussions about very complex racial issues? Can we dismantle this? Can we talk about it? It's complicated, but I'm ready to be have a seat at the table and discuss it.
Right.
So that can happen.
What do you think is I mean, this is a broad question, but just in your opinion, what do you think is the reason for that? Like, just real briefly, I've shared this with some people. I had a story when I first started out in radio here in San Diego, and like I was basically like a paid intern at the station. I hadn't even been on air yet, and I went to another place in town to do a voiceover, and the first thing the guy said to me was, when he listened to me, he's like, "Well, you know, you definitely sound Black." And my response to him, without missing a beat, was like, well, yeah, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And without missing a beat, he replied to me that, oh, well, you know, such and such had that problem also.
Problem?
That problem. So, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, like, you know, if you have any idea or opinion, what do you think brings on that mindset to where it's like, we just want you to play this role, and then it becomes like, well, you're good at that role. Like, what is the mindset that allows that to happen? You know, that's
a very good question. To be honest, to really dig deep when I think about it, it is rooted. It's rooted in the strange fruit. The root is in the strange fruit. I'm going to say that, and I'm borrowing that phrase from Nicole Slatter, who is a celebrated African-American actress, playwright, so on and so forth. And when I think about it, right, there are several different, in terms of what's going on currently with the climate, the racial climate, there are several different movements, right? We have the Black Lives Matter movement. We have the anti-Black movement. We have the anti-racist movement, right? And although they all sort of intersect with various issues, they're distinctly different. And I think given the history of this country, right, which many don't know the true story, right, other than the limited history that we get when we go to school, which is like, oh, Black people were enslaved. It's like, there's more to that story. Can we go into the complexities of slavery and what that actually means to have been brought to this country 400 years ago, and all of those inequities that have built up generation over generation?
It's like Black people were slaves. Abraham Lincoln set them free, and from then on, they should have pulled themselves from the bootstraps. And that's what everybody learned.
I'm like, exactly. And I'm like, no, the knee is on the neck, right? The knee is still on the neck. Okay, so if you can get up off of that and give me some opportunities, I'll show you what I'm made of.
Right.
I'm not afraid of working hard.
Right.
I'm not afraid of like going for that opportunity. But it's like, if you don't provide it, then what are we talking about here?
Right. Exactly.
We're just fighting each other. So I think having that history in place where the other has benefited from white privilege, right? That's what I'm speaking about.
Yeah.
Right? More than anything. It's not like, I'm not going to say, point out, every racist that I see. It's not even just like, okay, you're racist.
Right.
I can call you that. But the point is, you have benefited from this system. So when you look at all of that, that has gone on for however many years and decades and centuries, even feels like a century. Right. It's like, what are you talking about here?
Right.
So convincing people of that is hard, because there's one thing to tolerate somebody. Tolerate doesn't give you a lot of room. I'm like, no, tolerating me is negative. Mm-hmm. Right? That's not helping me. I need the acceptance of what's going on in my world, in my life, right? So to know that I matter, right? And matter is not that much, right? To quote something that TJ put on Facebook about Michael Che from SNL. I don't know if you've seen that clip, right? It's just like, matter, that's it? Like, I'm asking to matter. Are you kidding me? And so it's a valid point, right? Yeah. And you're asking for civil rights. It seems absurd to me. So I don't think people have realized how much they've absorbed. It's just gone down through generation to generation. So even if that's not your intent, even if you're well-meaning, you're benefited from that system, and it's across the board.
Right.
That's just how, those are the spaces we exist in. So I think some people are just, it's their blind spot.
Right. And people need to understand, like, in this community that we work in here in San Diego, like, I don't want people to get what we're saying wrong. Like, there are so many lovely people in this. Absolutely. I mean, from the top down, like, this is a community. Like, there is so much love here, but with everybody everywhere else, it does become a matter of representation. And there are issues that, even in your household, like, there's a problem you see that your mama don't, there's a problem that your mama sees that you don't, you know what I mean? So, we're just here basically talking about, our experience. And like, when I have this conversation with you, I have the conversation with artists, I'm honestly learning too, because I know this business from the administration side. I know it from the tech side. I don't know what it is to be an artist. I don't know what it is to go and audition. I don't know what it is to seek a role. The closest I get to that is knowing that from the radio world, but even that's a little different. So when I'm talking to you and hearing this, I'm learning what it is from your perspective as a Black woman, number one, because everybody, like, we're not all the same. I'm a Black man. I don't mean I know what a Black woman goes through, because I'm not a Black woman.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, in those experiences, I want to jump ahead a little bit.
Sure.
Talk to me a little bit, because we've already talked about you being in the theater, and I think this is going to be a major thing for people to understand how you're informed. How did the legacy of your father impact you on this journey? And if we get a little beyond that, how does the legacy of your father impact San Diego or theater, period?
Sure. My father had a very big spirit, a big personality. And I've realized over the 13 years since he passed that it's a huge responsibility. That, to be honest, in the first probably 4 or 5 years after his death that I really backed away from, because it scared me to death. Because I said, the amount of people that my father knew and that know of him that still come up to me, like on the regular, to say, oh, I took dance class with your father in the first few years at UCSD, or I took this acting class, or he pulled me off of the street to do, Death of a Salesman. It's just enormous. And so I think after the first year that he passed, and I went to my first Theater Communications Group theater conference, which is held annually. And for those who don't know, theater, TCG, has been around since, oh my gosh, for at least, I want to say 60 years. Well, don't quote me on that. But at any rate, it's been around a very long time. And he regularly attended these conferences, and I didn't know what they were about. But, this was like my first one. I was a rising leader of color. I was participating in a program that the board had nominated me for through Common Ground board, right? And so I was like, okay, I was just sort of thrust to this position, and I thought, what am I going to do? How am I going to follow it up after this, right? Do you guys know who this is? Like, I don't even know how I'm going to do that. So I was scared to death, and I remember very clearly my first conference. It was in Los Angeles, and I was staying at what I call my Uncle Phil's house, right? The former, the late James Avery. That was my uncle, man. That was my uncle. He's known me since I was 4. And he was like, Monique, what are you doing with your life? That kind of thing. Right. And so I was staying with him and his wife. And I called him, like, I just started to get really upset, and I was scared. And I called, and I ran out of we were in the middle of like the Rising Leaders of Color, talk back or something. I don't even remember what the subject was, but I called him, and I was crying, and I was upset. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. How do I lift up my people and carry them forward into the future? I don't know how to do what my dad did. And he was like, Monique, I need you to calm down, right? Because I was upset, right? The tears were flowing. And I said, I have this responsibility. It's important. I have to do it. And he's like, okay. Listen, the way your father did it is not the way that you are going to do it. And that's okay. Just the fact that you were aware that you have this responsibility and that you want to take up that baton and pass it on, he's like, that's enough.
Right.
Like, that is enough. Right. And it took me a while to know that that was enough, and to accept that I wasn't necessarily going to be able to do it the way that he does it. Because I am 50% him, right? If we talk about science here. But I'm also my mother. And then there's me figuring out what kind of artist I want to be. Who am I going to be in the middle of this, right? And I felt a little bit like, oh, if I'm trying to figure out who I am, then I'm abandoning who this is. And he said, no. How can you? You got 50%. Listen, love it, hate it, whatever it is. You 50% your dad.
Right.
You're always going to be that. So then I said, okay, I got myself together. I talked with some other people who were struggling with legacy, like Luis Valdez's sons. We had a conversation, a very brief conversation. And I was like, okay, all right, well, how am I going to do this? And I'll admit, like, for me in administration, that is not the gift that Monique possesses, right? That is another side that is complicated. And then I'm like, you know what my gift is? It's on stage, you guys. That is where I serve best. That is where I can heal people. That is where I can entertain people. That's where I can get people to see beyond their personal dimensions. That's where I can represent this Black woman in this space in this way. Right. And so once I sort of figured that out, in terms of the legacy, I was able to be like, okay, how am I going to make it my own? Right? So that it can turn into what it's supposed to be for Monique Gaffney. Right?
That's right.
Of course I love my father to the nth, I don't want to get too emotional about it, but it's like, okay, Daddy, I talk to him all the time. And he's very loud in this ear, trust me. He's like, you're not going to do that. And I'm like, no, we're not arguing about that right now. Right. And it's just, but I love what I do. I love acting with a passion that I don't even know if I can find the words to express it. Right. So having the opportunity in itself as a Black woman is enough, and is is huge
Right.
for me.
Right. I
Right?
get it. Yeah. Yeah. And for those who are watching, can you give us a little bit of a background? Because there's probably some people watching who don't know, and they should know. Can you give us a little bit, like just a little tidbit of background on your father professionally, so people who are listening, like that, because I'm sure there are people listening right now who are like, well, who's your dad? And they should know.
Absolutely.
They might not.
Right. No, it's like once you sort of go on to glory, as my grandmother would say, it's,
Right.
and even you leaving the legacy, it's the responsibility of those people who you left behind, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
as a representation of that for the whole Gaffney family, my father, the late Dr. Floyd Gaffney, was a professor of theater at UCSD, or University of California, San Diego, for 26 years. He came to the campus in 71, and he was invited to come, and he was one of the original co-founders, along with Arthur Wagner, another big spirit there.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 4 others, and of course I don't remember everybody's name, but Eric Christmas was one of them, because we were very good friends with him. And so they called him down, right? He was, at the time, he was teaching at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So he was up there teaching for about 3 years. And he got this invitation, and he moved down to good old sunny San Diego, right? And again, was there for 26 years in the department. And it went through many different reiterations, right? In terms of mission statements and chairpersons and so on and so forth. And he was originally from Cleveland, Ohio. He started out at the Caramoo House, right? In Cleveland, Ohio, and went on to the Cleveland Children's Public Theater, I believe, or Children's Theater, and did that for quite a while, right? Before he went on and became assistant at Ohio University. Like, education was huge to my father, right? So then he was assistant professor at Ohio University. He went down to Clark College. It was called Clark College, down in Atlanta, Georgia, for a while. And then, and at the same time when he met my mother, which was in 1959, you guys, and married his lovely wife, he was pursuing his bachelor's degree at Adelphi College, right? And he got his first bachelor's, or his one and only bachelor's, let me be correct about that, in dance, to be honest, at Adelphi College in Long Island, New York. And then once he married my mother and talked to Doris Humphrey, at least that's how the story goes, he decided to pursue theater full time. And so he went back and got a master's in theater, and then went on to pursue his PhD at Carnegie Mellon Institute of Technology. I believe that's what it was called back in the day. So in the late 60s, I think about 66, if I'm correct, he got his PhD in like dramatic theory and criticism, right? Dramatic literature, as I would say. Like, oh, okay, Daddy, you're very, foo-foo pop-on. And I remember him telling me this story, and I have to share it because it's just a great story. How true it is, I hope it's true, because he knew many people that came through the house through the doors of this house.
Right.
So when he was doing his, I believe, senior thesis at Adelphi, I believe the first one when he was pursuing his master's degree, the Langston Hughes showed up at this showcase. This is how the story goes.
The Langston Hughes.
The Langston Hughes, okay? 1959, 1960, and my father was doing this sort of avant-garde presentation of T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men, which is a very prolific, eloquent, and dense poem that to this day, I don't know everything that it's about, but it's beautiful. But anyway, he's doing this very avant-garde presentation. It's got dance, it's got acting, and after his performance and everybody's performance, supposedly Langston Hughes came up to him and said, after introducing himself, did you ever think about doing Black theater? And that's what my father said was sort of the impetus for him to really honestly the catalyst, whatever, to pursue African American theater. And I was like, really, Daddy? And he was like, yeah, because I was doing my experimental theater, whatever it was.
Right.
And he's like, that's when I really got vested. That's when I really got interested. And that led to him pursuing the master's degree again at Adelphi College, but then going on to pursue his PhD at, again, Carnegie Mellon.
Right.
And just this trajectory just kept going on, leading him all the way to UCSD. 1971, this is at the end of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King had already been assassinated and so forth, but there was a huge political movement on campus, right? And he became a part of that, let alone as being a Black man and representing, but like theater, what are we going to do?
Right.
For however many pockets of Black students were on campus, which was, relatively small in 71, right? And had grown, exponentially, right? And so it became his mission. But he didn't want to just teach about Black theater on campus for higher education. He was adamant about going into the community. So he was a huge figure in Southeast San Diego. He was always over at ECC, Education Cultural Complex, putting up show after show after show, right? By the, invited by, I'm going to forget people's names right now. This is horrible of me, but invited to direct at Southeast Community Theater, which became Southeastern Community Theater, which eventually became Common Ground when he came back as artistic director, right? So you have all of these invitations and sort of, for lack of a better word, signs that let him know that this was the right thing for him to be doing for his career. And of course, I saw that. I would attend rehearsals, I was young, but I saw myself represented on stage by these incredible Black actors. So I didn't know any different in terms of representation because he was already doing that work. Mm-hmm. So for those conversations that I found out later, like when James Baldwin came into my house, I was like 10 or 11. And I'm sitting on the floor staring at him. My mother said, all you did was stare at his eyes. I was so embarrassed. And I was like, Ma, I was 10 or 11. Like, he had big eyes. I was fascinated. Leave me alone. But all I remember is that, this was like 1979, 1980. And what I would do normally when we had guests, right, whoever it was, I'd put on my Sunday best and put my tights on, either my ballet shoes or my tap shoes, because I was always prepared to perform, right? I wouldn't necessarily talk, but I was ready to do a little dance. And I just remember sitting on the floor in the living room in front of him. He's sitting on this couch we had that was like green and gold. It was the ugliest paisley couch you've ever seen. And he just sat there and he was just chain smoking and drinking his scotch. And I remember because my mother told me, she ran around looking for this very specific scotch and frying up her infamous fried chicken, right? Right. And so like crossing paths with legends, with these artists from the Black arts movement, like that can't help but rub off on you. So when you realize that responsibility, you're like, okay, oh, wow. That's what I come from? Is that what I'm supposed to do? And then you have to figure out as you go along, right? Right. And it doesn't have to be that, but it's going to be something because it's in the blood. Right. I cannot escape it. And so having that responsibility and that love for the craft, I can't get away from it. And I have to say also, there have been several times where I've wanted to get away from it, right? Because I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. Right? Yeah. That's the exhaustion we talk about in terms of being an African American, right? Pursuing the arts, right? That's a whole other, we'll talk about it. I was just like, I'm exhausted being a Black person, but I'm exhausted trying to be a Black person, trying to prove myself that I'm worthy to be in this field with the rest of you. Right. And that's a constant struggle because of what's put in my face, right? Exactly. Absolutely. And so that's where, the whole discussion of, of representation comes in because of, what you saw as a child from your father and everything else that came along with that, that propels you. And then as that propels you also, as you get older and you become seasoned and you're finding your own way, that automatically becomes ingrained in you that you need
to fight for that representation to keep that thing going. And I guess that's where we go from here is like, I know you have a book that you want to talk about, and I want to get into that. But while we're on that discussion of representation, I feel that also, like as a broadcaster, because here in San Diego, it was just like with everything else, wasn't that many black people on the radio, wasn't that many black voices on the radio, and there was very, back in the day, you had to listen to the old 92.5, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it was like, there was Tayati Howard, there was Gene Harris, later on, I was able to work with Tayati Howard, I was able to work with the legends that I listened to on the radio as a kid, but it's because I heard their voices, you know what I mean? That number one, let me know I could do that, and I could do it sounding like I sound and looking like I look, And so, as we're moving into this talk of representation, like you're the perfect person to talk to about that, because sometimes we have these conversations and even black people will get to like, well, why are you begging these people to do anything? Why don't you do it on your own? It's like, no one's begging for anything. It goes along with the same argument as if like to me, in some ways, I understand that because we all want to do our thing and we all want to have representation, but it also falls along the same lines almost as like, if you don't like America, leave it. Well, my family has sweat equity in this thing. Like there's sweat equity and blood that's come along in here. So
absolutely.
And this is my whole community. So even if you start your own black theater, you're still a theater in this theater community in this city. So with that being said, like going forward, what are the things that you see that, especially coming out of this moment, because a lot of people are going to have to like put their money where their mouth is right now, because
absolutely,
there's been a lot of statements, and I don't just mean theater. I mean across the board in the country, there's been a lot of statements, and people are going to put their money where their mouth is. Were you just doing it for the bottom line at the moment, or were you really seeing that this is a time of change? What are some of the things that you see going forward from this moment that can help, not fix, because it's never fixed, but help carry this thing of representation along for the next generation and further to where we see the theater community, and it's not just for black folks, it's for Latinos, it's for everybody, start seeing these representation, not only of actors, but of stories, of narrative.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. I think there's several things that can actually be done, but I think one of the difficulties lies in order to get a seat at the table, right, and be present, there's a lot of dismantling that has to occur. And whenever you challenge people about their beliefs about, let alone themselves, but about another, you're asking them to closely examine their own prejudice and their biases. And that's a difficult place to be, right? Because then we all have to like level the playing field and talk about and be vulnerable. And that's already a scary place in general. I don't care what you're discussing, right?
Right.
So you have that element at hand. And then for those that do have entrance into those boardrooms or into positions of leadership, right? When you're unraveling this insidious, vicious, ugly system, things are going to arise that you're going to need to be able to control, right? In terms of the conversation, right? And so I think when all of that is boiling, emotions run high, things can get out of hand, right? So I think what's important when you're trying to have these conversations, which have to be had, like it's just like at that point, right? There's not like maybe we're gonna do it. It's like, no, we actually have to have this conversation, because if I see one more knee on the neck, I don't know what I'm gonna say. I don't. Like, let's just be honest.
Right.
This has been going on for forever. And if I may indulge me for a moment.
No, for sure. Do you.
So when I look at like the history of Black theater, right? And let me just talk about the history of Black theater that I know of in America, right? You're talking about the American Grove Theater back in 1821. And the reason I know that, other than like being prepared to talk today, is that when I had graduated from Columbia University, right? Finished my graduate school work. I was approached by Joe Powers, who was locally here. Shout out to Joe Powers, who invited me to come and do a production of The African Company Presents Richard III, which is based on a true story. This was written by playwright Carlisle Brown, and again set in the early 19th century, so like 1821 to 18, like I don't even think they were around that long, to maybe 1824. And so I was cast. TJ was in the cast with me, Reese Green, Walter Murray, and myself, and another actress, Janet Meskis, who doesn't live here anymore. But I didn't know that story, first of all, was true in terms of this troupe of ex-slaves who would come up from the South to the North, right? Let alone seek, they were free,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to do Shakespeare and other shows, but Shakespeare was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And taking on menial jobs in the meantime, right, in order to make it. So like, I'm thinking I'm in 2020 trying to be a Black actor. How was it in 1820, 21? Like, come on, like, wow. And this is based on a true story, right? And so in terms of them trying to put up this production of Richard III, they were competing with another white theater called the Clark Theater, and this is a true story, who was doing a production of Richard III as well, and had got a very famous Caribbean actor to play the lead, right? And to my understanding, or they were doing Othello. I might get it mixed up. But the thing on the matter is that they were run out of town, meaning the African Grove Theater, right? With William James Hewlett and William Brown were the real actors who were portraying these roles, right? Mm-hmm. But there were police raids. There was constant, for the audience who did attend, there was a lot of like just pushback. And eventually the company had to become defunct, basically, because it was like, nobody's coming to see our shows anymore because we're competing with this white theater, right? So you have that history already in place, Black against white, right? Mm-hmm. Or the anti-Black stuff that's already coming up, right? Right. And you fast forward to Black theater and you think of all the minstrelsy, right? Oh my gosh, so much blackface, right? So much, let alone Amos and Andy, all of these white actors like shucking and jiving and perpetuating negative Black stereotypes, right? So you got the Jezebel, you got the Sambo, you got the Pickaninny, on. And it's like, you're laughing at us and making fun of us and making lots of money. It was very lucrative for them, right? And we fast forward to the Black arts movement, which wasn't until the 60s. So you get a good, 20, 30 years of like minstrelsy and other offshoots of that just negatively portraying Black people. So representation is horrible, right? Right. And so Black actors are actually afforded the opportunity to do something. Like the first Black playwright that won a Pulitzer Prize was Charles Gordon. And that was his play, No Place to Be Somebody, which was up on the wall of the family room. My father would like proudly boast this poster. And so when you come from a history of negative representation to the point where you get to the Black arts movement of 1960s and you're like, okay, all right. And you got a Mary Baraka, and you got Ed Bullins, you got Nikki Giovanni, you got Sonia Sanchez, and you got Adrian Kennedy, and I can go on, right? Because of what I learned from my dad, because this certainly wasn't in any history books for me, right? Theater or not. It was like, okay, we're going to tell our stories and we're going to start our own companies. So while I value those historical Black theaters that still exist and had to and still have to in order to tell some of our stories, I also want to be able to get into the other houses to say, like, you got to learn about me. This is a fire next time, like James Baldwin talked about. Exactly. You got to learn about me and I'm going to learn about you. And maybe part of it is going to have to be my responsibility. This is from the point of view of James Baldwin, but it's like, okay, I'm going to take that up. That's fine. Right? I don't want to explain everything about myself. Like, let's be real. Like, this is global. This is like the revolution has been televised. Right. You can't get away from this. Right. It's everywhere. It's worldwide. And you're seeing it eye to eye. So for you to not acknowledge that, I can't get away from that. Right. So for those theaters that do want to be Black, do Black, do it. I don't have any problem with it.
Right.
But also remember, if we're going to level up, that we need to be everywhere and be comfortable being everywhere. And that means mainstream or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
I don't want it to be limited just by that and say that we only have to be do Black theater and be in Black spaces. I honor that because I think that's beautiful, and that's the place where it all took hold and where it still needs to exist. That never needs to go away. But also don't be afraid of those people who are like, I'm going to work there and there and there and there and there, and they should have the opportunity to do so,
Exactly.
no matter what color they are. So that's my soapbox.
Because at the end of the day, even like, and exactly what you're saying is right. And like, you have that history of understanding, but at the end of the day, we're not a monolith.
Right.
We're not always going to be in a position in this society to stand alone. I'm a San Diego native.
Right.
So, but I didn't grow up in Southeast San Diego. I grew up in Mira Mesa. And
that way, honey.
And if there's anyone who's listening, they've heard me say this in public. A lot of people who grew up in Southeast San Diego, I grew up in Mira Mesa. I was the other because I wasn't Black. I wasn't a San Diego Black because I didn't grow up in Southeast San Diego.
Absolutely.
So I was even the other from the Black community in San Diego.
Yes.
And as I've been on this, journey through the performing arts, because I stumbled into this. I wasn't trying to be in the performing arts. Like I said, I came by this way of selling tickets and ended up knowing tech and being an administrator. But coming up through this and going to, national conferences and seeing how low the numbers were of Black administrators, of Black people in tech, just seeing that lower number, but then looking at the population as a whole is because it's the space that we're told we're not supposed to be in.
There you go. It's very, very true. And again, I completely relate coming from power and supposedly not being Black enough. Oh, that is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, whole other conversation.
A whole other conversation, but that is a struggle that exists, right? We're talking about intra-racism, which is a whole other beast in itself, right? And you're like, oh, now I got to compete with that. Now I'm not Black enough. Oh, I need to live in your neighborhood in order to justify my existence. And it's like, honey, we are everywhere, right? And that becomes an economical thing as well, right? We're talking about class and everything else. And so it's complicated. It is so complicated. And I want people to really understand that, right?
It's complicated for us.
Right. Right? Let alone issues of colorism, which everybody's heard, right? Like, or you dark, you got short hair, oh my gosh, it goes on. And it's like, but again, that still comes from systemic racism, which we were built on. It's like, oh, I'm going to put you on the auction block and we're going to know, oh, you have the good hair. Oh, you're the big the big Black buck. Oh, you're great. You can produce. Like, we have inherited that. The past is still present.
Right. Exactly.
It just is.
Exactly. Well, that leads me into, let's talk about that book that you were showing me.
Okay, sure.
Let me know what you want to tell everybody about this book.
So, the Negro Digest that I was showing you?
Yeah, the Negro Digest.
So just to give a little context, this is, okay, let me see if I can put it up there and frame it. Okay, so this is the Negro Digest, and this is a picture of Ira Aldridge as Othello. This is April of 1969, and my father, along with many, wonderful Black theater practitioners, wrote an article in here. And I just want to read a little excerpt from an article written by Barbara Ann Tier, who has since passed on, and also my father, just to give a little highlight of that things haven't changed.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So this article written by Barbara Ann Tier is entitled "A Call to Action to Black Artists with Love." And she says, 1969, over 30 million Americans of African descent still find themselves occupying space in a foreign land, a land that is alien to them. And even though they know it is an alien to them, they are still crawling for crumbs. refusing to accept the inescapable fact that we are not wanted here because we are not needed here. Unfortunately, Black actors belong to and are part of that same oppressed minority. There's nothing they can do to change about this fact. The choice has been imposed upon them by racist white America. So it would seem that they would all immediately join some Black organization and begin to work side by side with their other brothers and sisters toward building a Black nation. The signs are all erupting around us. America is erupting. It's splitting at the seams. But rather than face this reality, Black actors continue to keep on pushing, trying to reach the top, obsessed with the ideal of making it. Yet when a few select do reach the top, they find it is somehow still the bottom because white people are still running the show. So they wrap their troubles in a sack of dreams and keep on keeping on, each day swallowing another lie, dying another death, trying to adapt to this man's culture, a way of life that is directly opposed to their very existence. They refuse to believe that they have bought a lie, the myth of the American dream. And she goes on, it's beautiful, but my point is that this is 1969, April 1969, and it's still going on, the same problems. So when I think about that, I know that I have to do whatever the work is that is required to dismantle the system. And that's what's important, right? Because now that the revolution is televised, you can't keep away from it. There's a responsibility. And there's a righteous anger in it, but there's also like this need for understanding and empathy, right? That's what I'm asking about. Yeah. And it's like, just, invite me into the space. Give me space to be seen, because you think you have, but you haven't. Or you've given me just this little space to come in and audition. What about inviting my community to be a part of your audience, like really inviting us and putting programs and systems in place? And that's
not just invite them to the Black show.
There you go. Like, yes, I know a lot of Black playwrights, but I know a lot of white playwrights too. I went to UCSD, for goodness sake. Like, let's just call it spades,
Right.
Let's keep it really real. And then just to add a little bit about my father, very quickly. Mm-hmm. So he wrote an article entitled "Theater Beyond Color in the Dark, King Henry V." And he goes on to talk about about Robert Hooks, right? Who was a part of Negro Ensemble Theater and had a very illustrious career, right? And I'm sort of simplifying, but he came to critical acclaim when he did The Dutchman, Leroy Jones or Amiri Baraka, how you know him, production of The Dutchman, which was very, if you have ever read any Leroy Jones, let me tell you. That is dense, that is political, that is, whoo. Yeah. That is the word. And here's the quote that I'm going to use. It's much shorter. My father said, "If white producers, directors, and audiences are unable to extend themselves beyond considerations of color, then Black artists must separate themselves completely from an institution that denies, restricts, and destroys Black creative energy and self-determination." So that's why I get on board with people who are like, listen, we're just going to have our own. Mm-hmm. And while I think that's very important, you can't stop there. Right. You can't. Right. So even if you're doing a variety of stories from the Black experience, Caribbean experience, whatever it is, in this Black and brown skin, wonderful, right? And you're doing it on your own, and it's important that you do that. You also, for those people who are like, I want to do that more, I'm for supporting both, right? I don't think it has to be one over the other in particular, right? Exactly. You don't need to define me. I'm still going to find my own. But in the meantime, I also want to get into your doors. So like, you can't, don't deny me that, right? I don't want the dream deferred that Langston Hughes was talking about, because it has already exploded, as we've seen.
Because even in where we're talking about theater or performance art, to where there's a primary focus on, a community or a group of people that are primarily Black. Like, we get that, we understand that, we need to see that, but the reality of life, as like we just talked about, growing up here in San Diego, where I grew up at,
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the limited few Black people who lived amongst this other community, and so
Absolutely.
therefore so a lot of times when we see performances of people who do live like that, it's still always that same type of person in that other community. And what we fail to realize is
Absolutely.
that, like, hey, um, everybody else, like, we still there's still dynamics in the limited few who live in that other community. You know what I mean? There's still,
Absolutely.
even though there's only 4 Black people in that neighborhood, all those 4 Black people are not the same. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
Very, very individual, right? Like you said, we're not this homogenous group. And for the Black actor or artist to represent the whole is ludicrous.
right,
It's like, I can't. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't remember. I don't know. Tom Cruise doesn't have to represent his entire white. What? Like, it's
right,
like, no. So why do you limit me in that fashion or say that's what you are? It's like, no, I'm so much more, right?
right.
Black is beautiful. Black is all of these very complex intricacies. And it's like, if you just try to what am I trying to say? Take that fabric apart, you would see a beautiful, just like, collection.
That's right.
There's
That's
so
right.
many stories, that still need to be told.
That's that's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Monique, we're about at an hour.
Okay.
I want to give people a chance if anyone does have any questions. I don't think you knew you was gonna come on here and be a history professor today. I don't
I
think
didn't either.
I
What
don't think
happened?
I
My
don't think you
daddy
knew
is
you was
rubbing
gonna do
off on
that.
me. Lord have mercy. Thank you, Daddy. What you do to me? I'm supposed to be acting up in here. All right.
But I appreciate it because, like, I learned so much from you today. If there's anyone who has questions, you can submit them in the text, whether you're on Zoom, on Facebook, you can submit them right now. You can also always send me an email at adents@sdrep.org. You can find me on social media. I make it real easy for you at Ahmed's Voice, whatever platform you're looking for me, at Ahmed's Voice. If you have a question or anything, um, Monique, if there's, as we wrap things up, if
Sure.
there's this one thing, you want to convey or tell everyone who's listening or who will watch this in the near future, because like I said, this will be rebroadcast again on YouTube and on Facebook. If there's anything, you want to let people know or say to anything as we wrap things up tonight, what would you want to say to everybody?
Oh, wow. I feel like I have so much to say, but not enough time, right? I mean, we've all been inundated with a lot of these conversations, right? And they're very sensitive, and what they require of us as human beings to examine is huge, right? We've
Right,
all gone through our individual suffering, personal and then generational, right? Which is huge based on whoever you are, right? And I think what's important is that, it's important to know who you are. It's important to know who you're not. It's important to know your purpose, and it's also important to leave that legacy, whatever that is. And I just think that's important across the board as human beings, and
right,
just to be afforded the opportunity to do that as a Black person, where I don't have to worry about my almost 6 foot dark skinned brother walking down the street and being killed.
yeah,
Like, something is small as that is important, right? And that's in the bigger scheme of life. And then when I look at theater and the arts, I want to see more of my stories told, and not in replacing the stories that I've seen, but in addition,
right,
all kinds of stories, right?
right,
Stories written by women and men, right? I
right,
want to see the
right,
women, right? Women of
right,
color in their stories as well, because everybody has a voice. And when you're not heard, the kind of pain and suffering that can actually happen is immense and unimaginable to people who aren't walking in your shoes. And to
right,
be not acknowledged or recognized is painful.
right, right.
So I would ask that for people to really think about and consider, right? And sort of, I don't mean want to say demand it, but like, You know, it's important.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
really,
Well,
really important.
Monique, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I would like to right now. I don't know the date, but I'd like to invite you back and
Oh,
possibly come back and maybe have someone else on with you so we can expand the conversation a little bit. But I just want to think, like I said, look, I'm a history kid. Like that was my favorite. That was my favorite thing in
okay.
school. And you dropped so much history on
Oh
us
my
tonight.
God.
Like I'm so but that's what I wanted though. That's what this is about. Is for people who come watch our shows, the people who work with us, the people
Sure.
who are trying to understand this thing, to um to just understand like there are some dynamics that they might not know, you know. And I think what's great about this too is that, you know, sometimes people get intimidated. They got questions for us they don't want to ask because they're afraid they're gonna be perceived as something. And we'd rather you just ask us.
Just
You know what I
ask. I'm ready. Like, I mean, come with it. Like, nobody needs to attack. Like, no, that's not the ground I'm standing on. That's not the
mean?
ground that I'm
No,
standing
I do got a question. I do got a question for you.
on. Okay.
Um, what would you like to see done or change or see in youth theater as far as the young people coming up and going through theater programs? What kind of things do you think they need to see coming up as youngsters entering this space?
That's an awesome, awesome question. I have to say, like, I had the great opportunity working with Common Ground Theater. I had a group of girls that I mentored, right? We were doing Shakespeare and participated annually in the Student Shakespeare Fest at the Old Globe. And as much as I learned so much working with the youth. But one of the things I think is important is, no matter what the theater company is, a lot of them have, um, education departments. And in terms of the Black youth, what I'd love to reinforce in terms of theater as a whole is like giving them the opportunity to know about Black theater, the history, the playwrights, and the opportunity to not only read it but to participate as an actor. And there's a good 3 or 4 Black theater companies that exist here, and it would be
Right,
nice for us to work together to actually do that. That would be wonderful to come together. I mean, that's just an idea off the top of my head, right?
right, right,
And for in terms of educating the youth, giving them the opportunity, because there's hip hop theater, that's a big deal.
right, right.
So like having a program through one of the theater institutions to really like take hold of that baton and like, okay, this is what we're going to do. That would be awesome. And whether that's a collective group of Black theaters here,
Right.
one in particular, I think that would be great, because they need to see themselves, because that is so important. That reflection, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, you know what? Me and Amanda Sitton have been having this conversation for like about probably like about 8 years now, because you know Amanda does so much work with
Oh, yes, she does.
trouble youth.
Know
You know
her
what I mean?
well.
And we've been having that discussion about how do we bring trouble youth or people who are coming from a bad background? Like how do we introduce them into this theater world? And my aspect from that is like not just about the artistic side. Again, it's like how do we bring them into understanding that in this theater life there is tech, there's carpentry, there's electrical, there's this. Like, there are
Absolutely.
all these other avenues that go into this, you know, theater and performing arts world. So, and again, that's another thing of representation. Like, yeah, you know, people of color do that stuff too in theater. Like,
There
you know
you
what I
go.
mean? So,
There you go.
you know, I have another question, one more for you.
Sure.
What do you think COVID and Black Lives Matter will change or do to the theater scene in terms of access and change?
Wow.
That's a good one.
Isn't that the $20 million question
Yeah,
at this
yeah,
moment, right? Because, with COVID, oh, wow, that brought a lot of things to the surface, right? The magnifying glass
yeah.
was right there, and you're like, wow, look at all of these issues.
Right,
How are we going to deal with them? And they're many different facets, right? It's ridiculous the amount, right? Um, it's that's a really complex question, but I will say this. Let me speak first to the COVID, right?
hmm
I, along with, oh my God, my cohorts, Hi, TCG cohorts. What are we, round 13? I think we're round 13, right? So I have, for those who don't know, I'm having TCG Fox Foundation resident actor fellowship. I'm partnered with the Globe, and I have one of my fellow cohorts here who's asking that question. You're in trouble. So as far as like COVID, like that was something that was discussed. We TCG also always has this annual conference, and there were many people discussing this, right? And one of the things that I think that will come out of COVID is like, okay, how are we going to do theater, and how are we going to do it better, right? And that encapsulates a whole lot of different things that I don't think that I actually have. That's him, right? Shout out, outside. All right, so that I don't have the answer to. I'm curious as to what theater is going to turn into, and I think that's everybody's question, right? Broadway shut down until January, right? Yeah. And then other companies, as they do open up, it's like there's very, strict restrictions, and it's like, what are we going to do?
If they open back up.
If they open back up, because that's right, because a large number are closing, which just breaks my heart, right? Yeah. So when I think about COVID, I'm just like, it's going to change the way theater is seen, of course, and all aspects of the word seen, right? In terms of people who participate, in terms of the audience, in terms of the actor, and all those, oh my gosh, numerous roles of people who are employed through the theater. There's so many people, right? Down to the patrons, right? And so that's just an awesome question, and I'm pondering that. And as far as the Black Lives movement, right? Oh, aren't we all? As far as the Black Lives movement, I mean, I think that has the power to do a number of things, right? We've already been discussing a lot of those things for the hour, but I think that the biggest thing or takeaway that I'm feeling in this moment is that being even remotely considered to be at the table is huge. Being invited into the room, not having to barge in, but being invited into the room to say, what can we do? What actions can we actually take? And taking those actions, because lip service and platitudes is not going to do us any good, because we got plenty of that with these statements, right? Right. Like, we think you're with us, but I don't know for sure until you actually do something, right? Actions speak louder than words. We all know that. Basic 101. So when you talk about coming into these rooms, we're talking about power. And so people are not readily going to get off of their power, give up their power anytime soon. Right. So my question is, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement really pushing a lot of these issues, like we're going to talk about this struggle for power. And what are we going to do about that? Right. Because that's a very real thing. That's right. Right? No matter what color you are. And it's like, you're going to talk about what? And not just like power in terms of who's in charge, in terms of the hierarchy, but we're talking about money. Right. And then when you talk about money, whoo, you are leveling up to the next thing, right?
When did they really stop? When did they really start not liking Martin Luther King Jr. when he said we're coming for our check?
There you go. There you go.
That's a direct quote. I didn't make that up. That's a direct quote.
No, I believe you. And it's a very true statement, right? Because then it's like, I got to share that with you. And there's those people who will, and those who will give you that much, those who are indifferent, and those who are like, I don't think so. You're not getting any of this. Right. And so you understand when people come against you. Not understand, but I'm not surprised.
Exactly.
So it's like, okay, well, that's what it comes down to. Yep. Let's be real and let's figure it out.
That's right. Let's get to let's do one more. This is going to be our last question. This from one of our partners in crime. This is from Miss Delicia Turner Sonnenberg.
Oh no, Delicia, say it ain't so, girlfriend. Let me get pineapple juice. Hold on.
Is that all that is? Pineapple juice? Yes. That's your story and you're sticking
to it? That's pineapple juice. This is Vita, coconut water. I'm not lying, people. But I have whiskey rum too. Don't worry.
Delicia, I'm just going to quote her question.
Oh, no. All
Yeah.
right.
Her question is, how do you understand trouble in mind now?
Oh, thank you, Delisa. That's a beautiful question. Wow. Okay, trouble in mind. When did I do this? I think this was in when was it? 2010, 2012. I think it was 2012. Forgive me for not remembering the year. I do understand it very differently now, because when I think of one of the key scenes for me, which was near the end of, I believe, the second act, when my character gets on stage and I reenact a series of Black stereotypes, like just go to the nth degree, go in. So when I'm playing the pickaninny, or I'm doing the Black brute, and really just, let alone saying the words, I'm a little like emotional about it, because number one, it's history. It's real. This was not some fiction that she wrote about, right? This wasn't made up. This actually happened, because we're talking about minstrelsy and blackface, and how white people made lots of money, right? It was very lucrative for them forever. So it takes on a very different resonance for me now, because I'm like, now I know, or in my opinion, really understand what was at stake, right? Because you're saying something about me as a Black person, this negative representation, and saying this is who I am. And I'm like, nope, that is not who I am. And so for me to think about all those people who made the sacrifice so that I could be where I am, like I said, I get emotional, because I'm like, the debt that was paid, I don't even have the words. So recognizing that gives me hope, but it also helps me connect to the fact that the unimaginable things that people went through, that we can survive. And that even if it's small gains and small victories, that we can get there. But this is just the very beginning of a long road. So reflecting back on that really empowers me, reminds me of my worth, and nobody can define that. And makes me really proud to be Black, despite the history. It's like, okay, but
That's
look
right.
at me now.
That's
And
right.
look at us now. What can we do? What's the next step?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Monique, for everyone who's watching, if they want to reach out to you or follow what you're doing, again, you guys can reach out to me for any information or questions I can pass along. But for those who are listening right now who will watch it, where can they follow you at, or how can they reach out to you?
You can find me on Facebook. I think it's just Monique Gaffney. I don't know. This is terrible. You think I know how to promote myself? I don't, people. But I am on Facebook, Monique Gaffney. And I'm also on Instagram, Gaffney Monique. And you can reach me either way. You can DM me or so on and so forth. And I'm very open to people who like shooting me an email as well. Send it to beinghenrietta@gmail.com, and that's BEING Henrietta HENRIETTA, all lowercase, one word, @gmail.com. beinghenrietta@gmail.com. Feel free.
Cool. Monique, again, thank you very much
Thank you
for
for having
doing this. Thank you for the conversation. I really appreciate it. I know everybody watching appreciates it, and you coming back. So
Okay.
just, be ready for that call or that email or that text or whatever, because
Yes,
you coming
sir.
back.
Yes,
And,
sir.
and everybody who's watching right now, remember, visit sdrep.org/listening. That's where you can sign up for our next installment of We Are Listening with my man, Mr. Freedom Bradley Valentine
Yes,
from the Old Globe. That will be on July 16th at
absolutely.
the same time. And everybody, again, thank you very much. Thank you, Monique.
Thank
And
you for having me.
Monique and all of you have a very safe and enjoyable 4th of July weekend, and
Yes.
we will talk to y'all soon. Thank you very much, Monique.
Okay, thank you. I'm
All right.
at
Bye-bye.
Bye.